All right, let's take a journey back to the 1920s in the United Kingdom. This was a time of transition, economic hardship, and cultural rebirth. Imagine a country still reeling from the devastation of World War I, trying to put the pieces back together while dealing with social, political, and technological change. To start off, let's talk about the economy. The UK was in rough shape after the war. They were drowning in debt, struggling with inflation, and unemployment was sky high. For the longest time, Britain had been the world's dominant industrial power. But now they were seeing that title slip away. Countries like the United States and Germany were emerging as industrial giants, leaving Britain scrambling to stay relevant. However, Britain did have one thing going for it: the British Empire. The colonies provided valuable raw materials, and industries like textiles, coal, and machinery were still key exports. But the early 1920s were hard. The British pound lost value, and things looked pretty bleak. Still, in 1925, the UK made the bold decision to return to the gold standard, hoping that would stabilize the economy. It didn't fix everything overnight, but by the end of the decade, the economy did start to show some signs of recovery. Then there was innovation. Even though the UK's economy was shaky, the 1920s were also a period of significant technological progress. Aviation, for example, was booming. Figures like Sir Charles Kingsford Smith were making historic flights, and people were starting to take flying seriously, not just as a military tool, but as a form of transportation. The Royal Air Force, which had been established in 1918, was a big part of this. The RAF wasn't just about defending the skies. It was about changing the way warfare was thought about. But it wasn't just aviation. The UK was leading the way in early radio technology, and in 1922, the BBC was born. That was the start of mass communication. Cars, too, became more common, and companies like Rolls-Royce and Vauxhall symbolized British engineering excellence. Even though the UK was behind in some tech fields compared to the US and Germany, British scientists were still making strides, particularly in physics and medicine. Now, on to the politics. The 1920s were a time of political upheaval and shifting power. The aftermath of the war left Britain in a fragile state, and the political landscape reflected that. The Labour Party, which represented working-class interests, gained significant momentum. By 1924, Ramsay MacDonald became the first Labour Prime Minister. His leadership marked a major shift in British politics. The Liberal Party, once the dominant force, was slowly fading. There was deep political division, especially when it came to dealing with things like labor disputes and rising calls for social reform. One of the key issues of the decade was Ireland. In 1922, the Irish Free State was established after the Irish War of Independence, and tensions between the Irish and the British continued to simmer. But internationally, the UK was involved in peace talks and diplomatic efforts, including the Treaty of Versailles and the Washington Naval Conference, which were both part of an effort to stabilize the post-war world order. On the military front, the 1920s saw a shift in Britain's approach to warfare. The Royal Navy was still the most powerful in the world, but air power and mechanized warfare were on the rise. The UK established the Royal Air Force, and this changed the way the military thought about conflicts. There was more emphasis on bombers and fighters. The Army, still recovering from the horrors of World War I, started adopting more modern tactics, like using tanks and motorized units. And as the Empire maintained its presence around the world, the military was active in places like India, Egypt, and the Middle East, helping to secure Britain's imperial interests. Let's not forget the social conditions. The working class was struggling. Strikes and labor unrest were common throughout the decade, as workers fought for better pay and working conditions. Coal miners and dock workers were especially active in these movements. But, in contrast, the middle and upper classes, especially in places like London, were enjoying a time of consumerism and new forms of entertainment. Think cinema, jazz music, and the rise of the flapper culture, where women were finding more independence and freedom. In fact, women had won the right to vote in 1918, but in the 1920s, the suffragette movement continued to push for more social change and equality. Of course, the divide between the working class and the elites remained significant, and many in the working class still faced poor housing and limited access to healthcare. Speaking of healthcare, it was improving, but still far from perfect. The National Health Service hadn't been established yet, but the government was making slow strides in providing social reforms. Pensions, unemployment benefits, these were introduced in a bid to alleviate some of the economic hardships, especially for the working class. But even with these reforms, poverty, poor housing, and high infant mortality rates remained persistent problems in industrial cities. Healthcare was often a privilege of the wealthy, and those outside urban centers had very limited access to public health services. Britain in the 1920s wasn't just about politics and economics, there was also a rise in immigration. While the UK's population was still predominantly white, there were growing communities of immigrants, particularly from the British Empire. People from India, the Caribbean, and Ireland were moving to the UK in increasing numbers, especially in big cities like London and Liverpool. The Irish population was particularly notable, especially after the Irish War of Independence and the creation of the Irish Free State in 1922. But with these changes came a rise in racial tensions and xenophobia. The influx of immigrants sparked social divisions, particularly in cities that were already dealing with their own set of economic and political struggles. Now, in terms of culture, the 1920s were a time of rapid change. Art and literature were flourishing, with figures like Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, and James Joyce shaping the modernist movement. The West End in London became the epicenter of theater and performance, and the film industry started to gain momentum. Jazz music was booming, bringing with it a new sense of freedom and cultural expression. But it wasn't just the arts. The flapper culture emerged, and women, particularly in urban centers, were challenging societal norms and embracing a more independent lifestyle. Let's talk about crime for a minute. With all the economic hardship, organized crime became more common, especially in London and other urban centers. Smuggling, bootlegging, and gang-related violence were on the rise. It wasn't just criminals on the street. Extremist political movements were gaining traction too. The fascist movement, led by figures like Oswald Mosley, began to grow in the late 1920s. Though it didn't have a huge impact during the decade, it was an ominous sign of things to come in the years ahead. Religion was shifting too. The UK had been traditionally a Christian country, with the Church of England at the center of religious life. But by the 1920s, more and more people were questioning traditional religious beliefs. Secularism and atheism were on the rise, especially in urban areas. This was a time of disillusionment, and many were turning to spiritualism and mysticism as they sought answers to life's big questions. Occult movements, interest in astrology, and the supernatural gained popularity, with figures like Aleister Crowley drawing attention to the mystical side of British society. And lastly, folklore and myths were still very much alive in British culture. Tales of King Arthur and Robin Hood continued to capture the public imagination, and ghost stories about old castles remained popular. Sherlock Holmes, created by Arthur Conan Doyle, continued to fascinate readers and viewers alike. Folk music and traditional songs thrived in rural communities, passing down stories and cultural traditions from generation to generation. So, there you have it. The 1920s in the United Kingdom were a decade of contrasts: economic struggle alongside technological and cultural growth, political unrest amidst social change, and a country trying to redefine itself after the devastation of World War I. It was a time of turmoil, yes, but also of innovation, and a period that would shape Britain for years to come. Thanks for tuning in to The World as We Know It, and joining me in another chapter of world history. As always, there are more detailed notes in the description, and we welcome any requests or recommendations in the comments section. If you found this video helpful, entertaining, or educational, please consider liking this video and subscribing to support our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.